had seen combat in 3 different countries during his 8 years as a Navy SEAL. He had parachuted behind enemy lines, navigated through hostile territories, and completed missions that most people couldn't even imagine. But nothing had prepared him for the challenge he would face at the hotel in downtown Chicago on a cold November evening. The veteran walked through the glass doors of the upscale hotel with his German shepherd, Duke, padding silently beside him. Duke wasn't just any dog, he was Lifeline, his constant companion and his certified service animal. The jet-black shepherd had been trained to detect the early signs of PTSD episodes, to provide deep-pressure therapy during panic attacks, and to wake him from the violent nightmares that had plagued him since his last deployment in Afghanistan. Approached the marble reception desk where a young woman with perfectly styled hair was typing on her computer. Her name tag read, Jessica Guest Services. She looked up with a practiced smile that faltered slightly when she noticed Duke. "Good evening, welcome to the hotel. How can I assist you tonight?" Jessica asked, her voice professional but cautious. "I have a reservation under. I'll be staying for 3 nights, replied, pulling out his wallet to retrieve his identification and credit card. Jessica's eyes kept drifting to Duke, who sat perfectly still beside, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the lobby with the alertness that came from years of training. The dog wore a clearly visible service animal vest with patches identifying him as a working animal, but Jessica seemed uncomfortable with his presence. "I see here that you have a king suite reserved," she said, clicking through the computer system. "However, I notice you have a pet with you. Our hotel has a strict no-pets policy, and there will be an additional cleaning fee of $250 plus a nightly surcharge of $75. Felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm and steady. "Ma'am, this is Duke, my service dog. He's not a pet. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, service animals are allowed in all public accommodations, including hotels, without additional fees." Jessica's smile became more strained. "I understand your concern, sir, but hotel policy requires all animals to be registered as pets, and the fees are non-negotiable. If you'd like to proceed with your stay, I'll need to add these charges to your account." The lobby of the hotel was bustling with evening activity. Business travelers wheeled their luggage toward the elevators, while guests dressed for dinner made their way to the hotel's upscale restaurant. The sound of conversation and clinking glasses from the hotel bar created a backdrop of normalcy that felt increasingly surreal too as the situation escalated. "I need to speak with your manager," said, his military training helping him maintain composure despite the frustration building inside him. He had dealt with ignorance about service animals before, but usually a simple explanation was enough to resolve the misunderstanding. Jessica picked up the phone and spoke in hushed tones before hanging up. "Mister will be with you shortly. In the meantime, would you like me to proceed with the standard check-in process?" "I'll wait for the manager," replied firmly. Duke shifted slightly, sensing the tension in his handler. The dog's training kicked in as he moved closer to, providing the calming presence that helped ground the veteran when stress levels began to rise. This simple movement caught the attention of several other guests, some of whom began to whisper among themselves about the situation at the front desk. 5 minutes later, a tall man in an expensive suit approached the desk. Thomas had been the hotel manager for 12 years and prided himself on running an establishment that catered to Chicago's elite business community. He looked at Duke with barely concealed annoyance. "Good evening, mister. I understand there's some confusion about your accommodation needs," said, his tone suggesting he viewed this as an inconvenience rather than a legitimate concern. "There's no confusion on my part," replied evenly. "I have a service dog which is clearly identified as such. Under federal law, you cannot charge fees for service animals or treat them as pets." Glanced at Duke dismissively. "Mister, I appreciate your military service, but we have policies to protect our other guests and maintain the cleanliness standards they expect. The dog appears well-behaved, but we simply cannot make exceptions to our pet policy, regardless of the circumstances." The conversation was beginning to attract more attention from other guests and hotel staff. A couple waiting to check in stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension. The concierge, an older gentleman who had worked in hospitality for decades, watched the exchange with obvious concern. "This isn't about making an exception," explained, his patience wearing thin. "This is about following federal law. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking you to comply with the ADA. His expression hardened. Sir, if you're not willing to pay the required fees, I'm afraid we'll have to cancel your reservation. We have other guests to consider, and I won't have hotel operations disrupted by this dispute. Felt Duke's warm body pressing against his leg, the dog's instinctive response to his handler's rising stress levels. The pressure helped focus, reminding him of all the techniques he had learned in therapy to manage situations that triggered his anxiety. I'd like you to document in writing that you're refusing to accommodate my service animal, and that you're demanding payment of pet fees despite being informed that this violates federal law, said quietly. His confident demeanor faltered slightly. I don't think that's necessary. We're simply following standard hotel procedures. Then put those procedures in writing. Show me where your policy manual says you can charge fees for service animals. The manager hesitated, clearly realizing that the conversation had entered territory he wasn't prepared to navigate. The hotel had strict protocols for handling difficult guests, but none of them specifically addressed service animal accommodations. I'll need to consult with our corporate office, said finally. In the meantime, I'm afraid I cannot complete your check-in process without payment of the animal fees. Pulled out his phone and opened the voice recorder app. I want to be absolutely clear about what's happening here. You're refusing to accommodate my service dog and demanding that I pay pet fees despite being informed that this violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. Is that correct? The lobby had grown noticeably quieter as other guests and staff members realized they were witnessing something more serious than a typical customer service complaint. Looked around nervously, suddenly aware that his handling of the situation was being observed by numerous people. Mister, perhaps we could discuss this in my office privately, suggested, his tone becoming more diplomatic. I think we've discussed enough. I'll be filing complaints with the appropriate authorities, and I'll be sure to document everything that's happened here tonight, replied, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded respect in dangerous situations overseas. As turned to leave, Duke, moving smoothly beside him, made a decision that would prove to be catastrophic for the hotel. Instead of letting the veteran walk away, he called out loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Sir, if you leave those premises with that animal without paying the required fees, I'll be forced to call security and have you escorted from the property. Stopped and slowly turned around. The lobby had fallen completely silent now, with all eyes focused on the confrontation. Even the hotel's restaurant staff had emerged to see what was causing the commotion. Are you threatening to have a disabled veteran arrested for refusing to pay illegal fees for his service dog? Asked, his voice carrying clearly across the marble-floored space. Realized too late that he had made a serious error in judgment, but his pride prevented him from backing down. I'm simply enforcing hotel policy, which applies to all guests equally. Looked around the lobby at the faces watching the exchange. He saw business travelers, tourists, hotel employees, and local residents who had come for dinner. Many looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, while others seemed sympathetic to his situation. Does anyone here have a phone? Asked the gathered crowd. Because I think people should see exactly how the hotel treats veterans with disabilities. Several hands immediately went up, and multiple phones emerged from pockets and purses. The age of social media had arrived at the hotel, and Thomas was about to learn how quickly a simple business dispute could spiral completely out of control. Within minutes of his request, a dozen phones were recording the scene in the hotel lobby. Stood frozen behind the reception desk, finally understanding that his decision to escalate the situation had been a terrible mistake. The confident hotel manager who had dismissed a disabled veteran's concerns now looked pale and uncertain as cameras captured every word. Sarah, a local news reporter who happened to be staying at the hotel while covering a story about Chicago's tourism industry, pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. She had recognized the significance of what was unfolding and began asking direct questions about the hotel's policies. Can you explain to viewers why the hotel is charging pet fees for a clearly identified service animal? Sarah asked, holding her phone steady as she recorded increasingly uncomfortable responses. This is a private matter between the hotel and our guest, stammered, realizing that every word he spoke was being broadcast to potentially thousands of people on various social media platforms. "Federal law isn't a private matter," interjected calmly. Duke remained perfectly positioned beside his handler, the dog's training evident in his complete focus on despite the chaos surrounding them. "The Americans with Disabilities Act is very clear about service animal accommodations." An older gentleman who had been watching the exchange stepped forward. Robert Martinez had served in Vietnam and immediately recognized both the bearing of a professional soldier and the unmistakable signs of a service animal partnership. He had been dining in the hotel restaurant with his wife when the commotion drew their attention. "Son, I want you to know that not everyone here agrees with how you're being treated," Robert said loud enough for the recording phones to capture. "I fought in Vietnam, and I didn't serve so that veterans could come home and be discriminated against in their own country." His words prompted murmurs of agreement from several other observers. A woman who had been checking in with her family approached directly. "Excuse me, but are you really going to call security on a veteran with a service dog? Because if that's the kind of establishment you're running here, we'll be taking our business elsewhere." The woman's husband nodded in agreement, while their teenage daughter looked embarrassed by the entire situation. They had driven from Minneapolis to visit Chicago for their daughter's college interviews, and this was not the kind of experience they had expected at an upscale hotel. Tried to regain control of the situation. "Ladies, I appreciate your concerns, but this is simply a misunderstanding about hotel policies. We support our veterans and have no intention of discriminating against anyone." "Then why are you charging illegal fees?" asked Sarah, who was now the encounter to her news station's social media accounts. The viewer count was climbing rapidly as people shared the stream across various platforms. Watch the scene unfold with a mixture of vindication and sadness. He had served his country with distinction, had sacrificed his mental health in defense of American values, and now found himself having to defend his basic rights in a hotel lobby. Duke sensed his emotional state and performed a subtle alert behavior, pressing his nose gently against hand to provide grounding. Jessica, the front desk clerk, looked increasingly distressed as she realized her initial handling of the situation had contributed to the growing crisis. She had received minimal training about disability accommodations and had simply followed what she thought were standard procedures. Now she found herself at the center of a viral social media incident that was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's control. "Mister," Jessica whispered urgently, "maybe we should just waive the fees and complete the check-in. This is getting out of hand." But's pride had been publicly challenged, and he doubled down on his position. "We have policies for a reason, and I won't be intimidated into abandoning them by social media pressure." His statement prompted an immediate response from the crowd. Several people began typing furiously on their phones, posting about the incident to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tik. The hashtag discrimination began trending within the hour as news of the confrontation spread across the internet. Pulled out his own phone and called the disability rights organization that had helped him navigate various accommodation issues in the past. Within minutes, he was connected to an attorney who specialized in ADA violations. "Document everything," the attorney advised. "Get witness statements if possible and make sure you have video evidence of their refusal to accommodate your service animal. This is a clear-cut violation, and there will be consequences." As spoke with his attorney, more hotel guests began checking out early rather than associate themselves with the establishment's treatment of a disabled veteran. The concierge, James, had worked in hospitality for 30 years and had never seen a customer service situation deteriorate so rapidly. "Mister," James said quietly, "perhaps we should consider consulting with corporate headquarters before this situation escalates further." But it was too late for corporate consultation. News outlets across Chicago had picked up the story from Sarah's. Radio stations began discussing the incident during evening drive time, and local television news teams were already en route to the hotel. Dr. Williams, a disability rights advocate and professor at university, happened to be attending a conference at a nearby hotel when she saw the. She immediately drove to the hotel with several of her colleagues, adding academic credibility to the growing crowd of supporters. "What we're witnessing here is textbook discrimination," Dr. Williams explained to the cameras as she arrived on the scene. Service animals are not pets. They're working animals that perform essential functions for people with disabilities. Charging fees for service animals is like charging someone extra for bringing their wheelchair. The hotel's restaurant and bar areas had emptied as guests and patrons came to witness the confrontation in the lobby. The financial impact was immediate and visible, as paying customers abandoned their meals and drinks to express their disapproval of the hotel's policies. Finally realized that his handling of the situation had created a public relations disaster that extended far beyond one dissatisfied guest. He attempted to salvage the situation by offering a complimentary room upgrade, but the veteran declined. "This isn't about getting better accommodations," explained to the assembled crowd and cameras. "This is about ensuring that other disabled veterans and service animal handlers don't face the same discrimination I've experienced here tonight." The hotel's security team, led by Chief Security Officer Michael Foster, had been monitoring the situation from their office. Foster, himself a former police officer, understood the legal implications of what was happening and advised against calling for removal of and Duke. "Sir, with respect, this gentleman appears to be exercising his legal rights under the ADA," Foster told privately. "If we attempt to remove him for refusing to pay fees that we legally cannot charge, we could be looking at federal civil rights violations." By 9 o'clock that evening, the hashtag discrimination was trending nationally on Twitter. News outlets from across the country were picking up the story, and disability rights organizations were issuing statements condemning the hotel's actions. The hotel had become the center of a national conversation about disability discrimination and veterans' rights. Local veterans organizations began arriving at the hotel to show support for. Members of the VFW, American Legion, and disabled American veterans filled the lobby, turning what had begun as a simple accommodation dispute into a powerful demonstration of solidarity. Made increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative, but each statement he made only seemed to fuel more outrage. When he suggested that the hotel's policies were designed to protect other guests from unpredictable animals, the response from the disability community was swift and fierce. "Service dogs undergo years of training," explained Dr. Williams to the gathered media. "They're typically better behaved than most human guests in a hotel setting. The suggestion that they're unpredictable shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what service animals are and how they function." As the evening progressed, the hotel's phone system became overloaded with calls from angry members of the public, journalists seeking statements, and corporate executives demanding explanations. The reservation system showed a wave of cancellations as guests chose to take their business elsewhere rather than support an establishment that discriminated against disabled veterans. Remained in the lobby throughout the evening, accepting support from fellow veterans and advocates while continuing to document the hotel's ongoing refusal to provide lawful accommodations. Duke maintained his professional demeanor despite the chaos, demonstrating the precise training that made him an invaluable partner for his handler. The incident that had begun with a simple request for hotel accommodation had transformed into something much larger. News crews from 3 major Chicago television stations had set up outside the hotel, and social media activity around the incident showed no signs of slowing down. The hotel found itself at the epicenter of a national controversy that would have consequences far beyond one veteran's quest for a place to spend the night. By midnight, the hotel was experiencing a complete operational meltdown. The corporate headquarters in New York had been bombarded with calls from news outlets, disability advocacy groups, veterans organizations, and furious customers threatening boycotts. CEO found herself in an emergency conference call with the hotel's legal team, public relations specialists, and crisis management consultants. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. Online reservation systems showed hundreds of cancellations within hours of the story breaking. The hotel's review ratings on major travel websites plummeted as thousands of negative reviews poured in from people who had never even stayed at the property, but were outraged by the treatment of and Duke, who had started his shift confident in his authority and management skills, now faced the reality that his career was effectively over. The corporate legal team had made it clear that his handling of the situation had exposed the company to significant liability under federal civil rights laws. "We need damage control, and we need it now," CEO told the crisis management team. This story is trending nationally, and we're looking at potentially millions of dollars in lost revenue, not to mention the legal exposure. The hotel's parent company, Platinum Hospitality Group, began implementing emergency protocols designed for major public relations disasters. They brought in a team of disability rights experts, veterans advocates, and civil rights attorneys to help craft a response that might salvage their reputation. Meanwhile, in the lobby that had become ground zero for a national conversation about disability rights, continued to receive support from an ever-growing crowd of veterans and advocates. Local restaurants began sending free food to sustain the gathering, while volunteers coordinated media interviews and documented witness statements. Sarah, whose initial had sparked the viral response, found herself at the center of one of the biggest breaking news stories of her career. Her phone had been ringing continuously with calls from national news networks requesting interviews and footage from the scene. This started as a simple accommodation dispute, Sarah reported during a live television broadcast from outside the hotel. But it's evolved into something much more significant. We're seeing a community rally around the principle that disabled veterans deserve better treatment than what happened here tonight. Dr. Williams had been working with legal advocates throughout the evening to document the incident and ensure that understood his options for seeking legal remedy. The Americans with Disabilities Act provided for significant penalties in cases of public accommodation discrimination, and the evidence against the hotel was overwhelming. This is exactly the kind of case that changes industry practices, Dr. Williams explained to reporters. When hotels see the financial and reputational consequences of discrimination, it motivates them to train their staff properly and implement correct policies. At 2 in the morning, corporate executives finally arrived at the hotel to assess the damage and attempt to resolve the situation. Flew in from New York on the company jet, accompanied by the legal team and a crisis management specialist who had handled discrimination cases for other major corporations. His first action was to remove from his position and place him on administrative leave pending a full investigation. She then personally approached to attempt some form of resolution. "Mister, I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received at our hotel tonight," said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had spent hours dealing with a corporate nightmare. "What happened here was completely unacceptable and contrary to our company's values." Looked at the CEO with the steady gaze of someone who had been through too much to be impressed by corporate damage control. "Ma'am, with respect, if these were really your company's values, your staff would have been properly trained about disability accommodations. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was systematic discrimination." Knew he was right. The investigation that her legal team had conducted over the past few hours had revealed that the hotel, like many properties in their chain, had never implemented proper ADA compliance training for front desk staff. The discriminatory charges that had been asked to pay were actually built into their standard operating procedures. "You're absolutely correct," admitted. "We failed in our responsibility to provide proper training and maintain ADA compliance. I want to discuss how we can make this right, not just for you, but for all disabled guests who may have been affected by our inadequate policies." The conversation between and was conducted in full view of the media and advocates who had maintained their vigil in the hotel lobby. Their discussion became a negotiation that would ultimately reshape how the entire Platinum Hospitality Group handled disability accommodations. Advised by the disability rights attorneys who had joined him, laid out his terms for resolution. The hotel chain would be required to implement comprehensive ADA compliance training for all staff at every property. They would establish clear policies prohibiting fees for service animals and create a monitoring system to ensure ongoing compliance. Additionally, the company would make a substantial donation to veterans organizations and disability advocacy groups, funding programs that helped other disabled veterans access proper accommodations and understand their rights under federal law. "This isn't about punishing one hotel," explained to the gathered media. "This is about creating systemic change that prevents other disabled people from going through what I experienced tonight." The negotiation continued through the early morning hours, with disability rights advocates, veterans representatives, and corporate attorneys working to craft an agreement that would have lasting impact beyond the immediate incident. By dawn, the hotel had become the site of an unprecedented corporate accountability moment. The agreement reached between and Platinum Hospitality Group included immediate policy changes, mandatory training programs, and a commitment to regular third-party auditing of ADA compliance across all company properties. The financial cost to the hotel chain was enormous. Beyond the immediate revenue losses from cancellations and negative publicity, they faced implementation costs for the new training programs, legal fees, charitable donations, and potential ongoing litigation from other guests who had been illegally charged service animal fees in the past. Dismissal was formally announced that morning, along with a comprehensive review of management practices at all Platinum Hospitality properties. The company also hired Dr. Williams as a consultant to oversee their ADA compliance transformation, ensuring that the changes would be meaningful and lasting. The story continued to generate national attention for weeks afterward, became an inadvertent spokesperson for disability rights, appearing on television news programs and speaking at conferences about the importance of equal access and accommodation. Duke, the service dog whose presence had triggered the entire incident, became something of a celebrity himself. His calm professionalism throughout the chaotic evening had demonstrated to millions of people the remarkable training and capability of service animals. The hotel eventually reopened under new management with completely revised policies and extensively retrained staff. The lobby where had made his stand was redesigned to include prominent displays about the hotel's commitment to accessibility and veterans' rights. Never did stay at the hotel that night. Instead, he spent the evening in the lobby surrounded by supporters, documenting discrimination and ultimately changing an entire industry's approach to disability accommodation. He checked into a different hotel the next day, where the staff properly welcomed both him and Duke without question or additional charges. The incident became a case study taught in hospitality management programs across the country. Business schools used the hotel crisis to illustrate how discrimination can destroy a company's reputation in the age of social media, and why proper staff training is essential for legal compliance. For the victory was bittersweet. He had successfully challenged discrimination and created positive change for countless other disabled people. But the fact that such a battle had been necessary in the first place remained a reminder of how far society still needed to progress in truly accepting and accommodating people with disabilities. Duke continued his faithful service, never knowing that his simple presence in a hotel lobby had sparked a national conversation about dignity, respect, and equal treatment under the law. The bond between the veteran and his service dog had not only survived the confrontation, but had become a symbol of resilience and the power of standing up for what is right, even when facing overwhelming opposition. The hotel incident ultimately demonstrated that, in an interconnected world where injustice can be documented and shared instantly, corporations can no longer rely on discriminatory practices without facing immediate and severe consequences. It proved that one person's refusal to accept unequal treatment could create waves of change that extend far beyond their individual circumstances.